Now, on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app. O'Connor and Company.
Good Friday morning. It's 5:06. It's so close to being 5:07 that I almost just want to ramble for about 3 more seconds. It's 5:07 and it's Friday morning. It's the 4th day of April. That's 4-4 if you like those sort of things. Yeah, you know what I'm saying. Get to the racetrack. Thank you for joining O'Connor and Company as we wake you up and get you going in the best way possible on the right side of the pillow. Coming up at 7:05, Ryan Young with Competitive Enterprise Institute, who, well, takes issue with this tariff thing, so we'll talk to him. 7:35, Stephanie Turner, we talked about her yesterday. Pretty heroic woman. She was that fencer who took a knee rather than go on guard against a man competing as a woman. Over at University of Maryland, Stephanie Turner will join us. 8:05, Byron York from The Examiner. And then at 8:35, Amanda Chase wants to be the governor of Virginia, and she will join us at that time. I'm Larry O'Connor alongside Patrice Onwuka. Good morning, Patrice.
Good morning. Happy Friday, everybody. We made it.
It is a happy Friday, although I don't know, how's your how's your 401k looking today compared to yesterday?
Well, it's a little bit lighter than it has been, but hey, this could be a good time to buy some cheap stocks. You know what I mean?
There you go.
Look at them
Spoken
upside.
like a true globalist. Patrice, listen, talk me through this. I saw you on Sean Spicer last night, and I know that you had plenty to say about the tariff thing and the reaction to the tariff thing. There's definitely been a reaction. I'm looking forward to talking to Ryan Young yesterday, who's critical of the tariffs. We had a couple of guests yesterday, including the administrator from SBA, Kelly Loeffler. We had spokesperson from the White House. They were very enthusiastic, of course, about the tariffs, and I challenged them from a more traditional free trade perspective. And when we have Mr. Young on, I'm going to challenge him from the perspective of those who are huge proponents of the tariffs, because I understand a lot of the arguments for it. I think one of the most powerful arguments in favor of these increased tariffs and changing our stance that we have with some of these global trade partners is that 30 years after free trade and letting China into the World Trade Organization and moving all of this manufacturing from the United States to other countries, it doesn't seem to have worked the way we were told it was going to work. Right? The results are not what we were told and promised back then. And so it does make sense to me that something needs to be fixed about this. Whether tariffs are the solution or not, I think is still an open question. I do, however, want to point out before I hand it off to you, and you can sort of fill us in on where we stand here. Everyone who says tariffs don't work, tariffs don't work, tariffs don't work, the only reply I have is if tariffs don't work, then why do all these other countries have tariffs on us? Because they clearly think it works. Yeah. And if it's working for them, why don't we have tariffs in kind? So that's sort of where I am right now. I have an open mind, and I'm interested in hearing about it. And I know you've been studying it quite a bit.
Yes, this is such an interesting time that we're living through. I know that people's hair is on fire right now because we've seen a 3% loss in the markets, some of the different markets over the past few days. There was a wait and see perspective, and I still think people should wait and see how these tariffs play out. But a 10% baseline on virtually every country, and then building it continues to compound for different countries like China and Mexico. The door is not closed yet. I think negotiations are absolutely happening with different countries. Will there be reciprocal tariffs? I think we'll have to see. I've moderated.
You mean just
honestly,
real fast?
Larry.
You mean reciprocal tariffs from other countries?
From other countries against.
I just wanted to be
imports,
clear because
for those that they allow.
Right. President Trump is referring to these as our reciprocal tariffs to them. What you're saying is they could then respond once again. That's what people say is a trade war. Then we get into a trade war.
You know, I used to be 100% free market. Tariffs are bad in all situations, in all positions. I've actually moderated because I do see that, yes, tariffs can make goods more expensive, both the final goods that you get on your shelf as well as the inputs that are needed to produce them, the steel to produce the buildings, to build the buildings, or the lumber to that goes into so many pieces of furniture that are built out even here in the United States. But I also recognize that there is a big picture issue, and then there is just some of this important other ancillary issues that come up. I'll give you an example. National security. It raised my alarm when we saw that during the pandemic, how much of our medical supplies, the PPP at the time, was produced in other countries, particularly China. And we were dependent on those other nations like China to give us equipment to keep us safe and alive. That was alarming. As a result, we had to see, American businesses ramped up because the president used wartime powers to nudge, maybe even force American companies to mass produce hand sanitizer and masks that was needed. Yeah. And it told me that our supply chain cannot be, particular aspects of it cannot be 100% dependent on trading with other countries, because that puts us in a very vulnerable position. I think the other piece of it is, yes, free trade helps a lot of other countries, and it does help us to produce and be efficient. But the efficiency comes at a cost. And what is that cost? Well, it's the cost of decimated communities. People, entire swaths of this country have been left behind. Manufacturers shut down, plants shut down. That became not just, a place for jobs, but it really supported communities and the smaller businesses that depended on it. And there was no replacement to that. Joe Biden said, well, if you lose your job in a coal plant, go learn to code. Well, we criticized Joe Biden for making that argument, but conservatives have also made very similar arguments as well. Well, that just means we move to a service-based industry and everybody becomes a service provider. Well, what happens when AI, is able to, do some of those services and put people, and force them to look for other jobs? So it's a big picture. Let's say, Go ahead, Larry.
Let's say you decided, okay, fine, I'm not going to work in a factory anymore. I'm going to be a web designer. Well, web designers are becoming obsolete now because of AI. AI can design a website for you in 60 seconds. It's insane.
It is.
And now what?
There's an aspect of creative destruction. Yes. New industries always emerge and always build up. And I want America to be the dominant leader in creating technology, in producing and manufacturing as much as possible. That said, Americans, we've traded, all of this for cheap shoes from Shine and cheap furniture decor from Temu. So, I think this is the tension that we're up against. I've been like, listen, I'm not going to be wholehearted, yay, tariffs, because they will come at a cost. But at the same time, I'm also not so mired in traditional thought that I'm not open to us changing things from a long-term perspective, because I think what President Trump is looking at is not just 1 month from now, it is 20 years from now, and making the decisions now that can have those rippling impacts. I know I'm going to get heat from both sides on this, I'm sure. But I'm actually trying to say we have to have a very open perspective here.
Yeah, I'm with you. And that's sort of where I am. But at the same time, I think that there needs to be sort of clear eyes about what the impact might be. We saw a little bit of the impact in the markets yesterday, where it was just down across the board. You're right. That could be a buying opportunity, or it could be a sign of things to come. Because that's just on the announcement of these tariffs, not the actual implementation of the tariffs. And projections on the increased tariffs means that things like laptops and tablets and shoes and T-shirts and toys and so many of the things that we get from overseas are going to be a lot more expensive. And it's funny, so much of the conversation yesterday was about our European trading partners. Hardly anybody was talking about China. I mentioned this with Katie McFarland yesterday, and I said, Katie, in the long run, isn't this really all about China? And she started laughing. She says, it's all about China. This whole thing is about China. Problem is, with the World Trade Organization, you can't just impose and go after one country. There's various ways to raise tariffs because of the agreements that we have with the World Trade Organization. One way is if you declare a domestic emergency status based on your current economic and manufacturing status, and that means that under those guidelines you have to sort of raise tariffs on everybody because it has nothing to do with your relationship with one country or another. It's an across-the-board problem, which is how President Trump put this through. But make no mistake, 80-90% of this conversation, even though so much of it was about France and NATO and the EU, It's China, guys. It's China. In a moment, you're going to hear what J.D. Vance had to say about this yesterday. He had an interview with our mutual friend Lawrence Jones over at Fox News. Really good sit down. J.D. Vance is good at sort of boiling this stuff down, and he boiled the whole perspective with our relationship with China down in a way that I think is worth pondering. So you'll hear that coming up in 60 seconds. But, what you're going to get in those 60 seconds, because it's 5:16, and we got to get to Jamie Whitten. She is in the Hadid Carpet Cleaning Traffic Center. Make it count, Jamie. Make it count.
WMAL, making sense of the news. Live from the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios. Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
During the first Trump administration, everybody said that Trump's tariffs were going to be inflationary back then. What actually happened? We had 1.5% inflation. We had the fastest growing economy in a generation, and we had the beginning of a manufacturing renaissance in the United States of America. Then, of course, we had 4 terrible years of the Biden administration. But I think it's useful for all of us to step back and ask ourselves, what has the globalist economy gotten the United States of America? And the answer is fundamentally it's based on 2 principles: incurring a huge amount of debt to buy things that other countries make for us. And to make it a little bit more crystal clear, we borrow money from Chinese peasants to buy the things those Chinese peasants manufacture. That is not a recipe for economic prosperity. It's not a recipe for low prices, and it's not a recipe for good jobs in the United States of America. For 40 years, we have gone down that pathway. We've seen closing factories. We've seen rising inflation. We've seen the cost of housing so high that most Americans can't afford to buy a home right now. President Trump is taking this economy in a different direction.
That's pretty well said and pretty spot on. J.D. Vance, and understand, if you know his story, which I'm sure by now we all do, he comes from one of those towns that you were just describing that was devastated by this policy from the middle of America, from central Pennsylvania all the way to the Dakotas. We have, known as the Rust Belt, we have entire towns and counties that have been devastated by all of this manufacturing moving to China. It's all about China. It's all about the decision in the mid-'90s to let China into the WTO and then beginning offshore. And that's right as we hit the tech boom. That's right. There were no smartphones yet.
That's right.
There were, we had some laptops, but most of them were made in Texas. We didn't have tablets yet. We didn't have, MP3 players even. Then the tech boom happens, and suddenly we're using contract manufacturers in China and in other lower income countries in Asia. And as he put it, we borrow money from Chinese peasants because that's, it's China that buys all of the debt here in this country. They're our number one debt holder for the debt that, everyone says, we've got the deficits and we've got, national debt of trillions of dollars. Well, that debt, we owe that money to somebody. It's not ourselves. Most of the people who own that debt is China. And smart people recognize that that's actually a symbiotic balance. As long as, China's not going to attack us and try to destroy us as long as we owe them money, because then they'll never see that money again. A big part of their economy relies on us, on the debt they hold and on our manufacturing. But we borrow money from those Chinese peasants so that we can buy things that those very Chinese peasants make for us. And they make them at slave wages. And everyone who's screaming that we're going to have to pay more for T-shirts when we go to Walmart, you should recognize that you've been paying extraordinarily distorted, cheap fees for those. Those T-shirts should be more expensive. The only reason they've been so cheap is because you've exploited people living 6,000 miles away who are in a communist regime. That's the only reason. So maybe you've gotten really cheap stuff for a couple of decades, but that's a distorted figure, and it's time to sort of correct that.
So what's interesting is here, when you look at small businesses in this country, a number of them have been able to sell goods at higher prices because they sell made in America products. They sell products that have a storyline, maybe made by veterans or women owned or black owned, whatever the case is. There's a story behind it, and they're able to upcharge a $2 T-shirt and sell it to you for $25 because you believe in the mission. Unfortunately, that's something that's, I think, a middle class and upper middle class flex. You can do that. You can buy that $25 T-shirt because you have the funds to be able to do it. And inflation It's hitting everyone, but the people who are hit most hard are low-income families, are people who are on fixed incomes, folks who are working hard, or very poor people. They're the ones who are dependent on those $2 T-shirts, and when those T-shirts are no longer available, what happens to them? The point I made about why everyone is freaking out over these tariffs in a way they probably weren't as bad in the Trump 1.0 is very much about inflation. Where people are right now, where their budgets are stretched because of 4 years of Biden's recessionary monetary and fiscal policy, means that people are very price sensitive. And so when you tell them that these tariffs are, they are a tax on consumer goods, yeah, that's true. They tend to be passed on, not to the producers. They don't bear much of the weight of the tariffs. They pass it on to their customers at some point. But Americans are like, I can't take any more price increases. And so that's why I think you're seeing such a backlash against, both from regular folks who are like, I don't need any more financial pressure, also from the left, who love this as an issue to hit President Trump with, because the left has always embraced tariffs. Tariff policy is loved by everyone from Bernie Sanders to Chuck Schumer,
all
Nancy
of them.
Pelosi.
We've got Nancy Pelosi audio from the late 90s where she was, speaking glowingly of tariffs, especially against China. You're right. And let's wrap it up. We got more to talk about on this all morning long. And we've got Ryan Young from Competitive Enterprise Institute, very skeptical of these tariffs. He's joining us at 7:05. I'll just leave you with this. At the same time that people are complaining that, oh, my gosh, we're going to have to spend more for shoes and socks and T-shirts. And I recognize that there are people who need to do that. At the same time, we're buying all that stuff for cheap. Starbucks revenue last year was $36 billion. So there is something somewhat disingenuous about our economy where we demand cheap stuff made in China when it comes to our underwear and socks, but we're willing to spend $10 for a cup of coffee at Starbucks because that's something you can't get imported from China, but you could make it at home in your Mr. Coffee. So just think about that as we continue this very important conversation that everyone's having in this country. It's 5:25, WMAL traffic and weather every 10 minutes first.
Now on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app. O'Connor and Company.
We're already flying through this Friday morning. It's like we want to get to that weekend. And, well, I'm sure you know the feeling. Coming up at 7:05, Ryan Young, Competitive Enterprise Institute. We'll get his critical analysis from his perspective of the tariff proposals, 7:35, Stephanie Turner. She's that fencer who decided that she would rather forfeit her match against a transgender athlete than actually have to raise this. Is it a foil? It's a foil, right? That's what they use.
I think so,
when they fence. Yes. Stephanie Turner. We're going to get her story. 8:05, Byron York, Washington Examiner. And then 8:35, Amanda Chase running for governor in Virginia. That's Patrice Onwuka. I'd know that voice anywhere.
And it's a Friday, Larry.
It feels like a Friday, doesn't it? It's feeling very Friday-ish. All right, as we said, we've got some... you already know that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are lying, double-crossing hypocrites. You already knew that. But we've got some good proof for you. Let's start with Chuck Schumer. Oh, actually, since we were just talking about tariffs, let's start with Nancy Pelosi. Here's Nancy Pelosi, 1996, right on the verge of getting that gavel as the historic first female Speaker of the House. She's, of course, pontificating against the Republicans who have been pushing for free trade with China, and 100%. This was Republicans, and Bill Clinton was fully on board with the idea of free trade with China. And so take a listen. This is cut 5 now. Nancy Pelosi on the floor of the House explaining the problem here with China in terms of a potential trade deficit and how to fix it.
How far does China have to go? How much more repression? How big a trade deficit and loss of jobs for the American worker, and how much more dangerous proliferation has to exist before members of this House of Representatives will say, I will not endorse the status quo. As I mentioned, it's about jobs, proliferation, and human rights. And there are those who say we shouldn't link human rights and trade and proliferation and trade. I disagree. But if we just want to take up this issue on the basis of economics alone, indeed, China should not receive most favored nation status for several reasons that I'd like to go into now. I'd like to call the attention of our colleagues to this chart on the status quo that the business community is asking each and every one of us to endorse today. Right now, we have a $34 billion trade deficit with China, the 1995 figure. It will be over $40 billion for 1996. Since the Tiananmen Square massacre, this figure has increased 1,000%, from $3.5 billion then to about $34 billion now. In terms of tariffs, I think it's interesting to note that the average U.S. MFN tariff on Chinese goods coming into the United States is 2%, whereas the average Chinese MFN tariff on U.S. goods going into China is 35%. Is that reciprocal? On exports, China only allows certain industries into China, of U.S. Industries into China, and therefore only 2% of U.S. exports are allowed into China. On the other hand, the U.S. allows China to flood our markets.
That's Nancy Pelosi on the floor of the House, 1996. What was up for debate was whether China should get most favored nations status for trading. She sounds like she was part of the team coming out of the White House yesterday making the case for Trump's tariffs.
She sounded like she was on the surrogate call. That's
by
where
the way,
Democrats have always been, Larry. Always been.
Well, and I want to say I recognize the danger of doing this because Republicans opposed her back then, and I understand, and I was one of them, by the way. Not as any sort of I was in the private industry. I was 96. I was handling Beauty and the Beast, Disney's Beauty and the Beast. It's in Los Angeles. If you saw it out in L.A., I was standing in the lobby. But that's not the point. Our argument was opening up China is going to do the same thing to those communist bastards as what we did to the Soviet Union. They're going to see capitalism, they're going to see free markets, and that's going to loosen it up, and that will end China's stronghold and authoritarianism. They will no longer be a threat, and this will be a brave new world that we're all living under, and we won't have it. This is, that was the idea. And also, by giving them favored nation status, it would change their ways. It would raise their standards, raise their wages, raise their, all of the other things that we were better at with them, and it would make the whole world a bet. None of that happened. I believed it then. I guess I shouldn't have. I don't know. But that was Nancy Pelosi then. And while we're at it, let's now go to Chuck Schumer. But let's set this up properly. Don't forget, early in the week, this is cut 3, Antonio Gracias with Elon Musk in Wisconsin explaining how illegal immigration is depleting Social Security. Listen.
When we saw these numbers, we were like, what is this? In 21, you see 270,000 people, goes all the way to 2.1 million in 24. These are non-citizens that are getting Social Security numbers.
Yeah. Now, you remember this. We talked about this on Monday, and I'm sure you've seen the graph by now. It's outrageous. And the argument is all of these illegal immigrants coming into this country and then getting Social Security numbers is making the system even more upside down than it already is. There's not going to be any money left. It's degrading the Social Security system.
And it's illegal, Larry. It's not. They should not be receiving benefits.
Well, it should be illegal. They were given this temporary status for asylum. Biden and Obama figured out a way to make it quasi-legal. That said, 1996, Chuck Schumer, back when he was in the House of Representatives. Listen to this.
I thank the gentleman, salute him for his work on this, rise in support of the amendment. First of all, Social Security card is used from one end of America to the other as an identification card right now. Who are we kidding? If you want to pass a law and says it shouldn't be, I would ask the chairman and the distinguished minority member of the Social Security committee to pass that law, but let's admit the truth. Everywhere people go, they're asked for a Social Security card. In fact, one way to prove you're a bona fide person who can have a job is to ask for a driver's license and a Social Security card. This is an anti-fraud amendment. Over where we go, people say, well, why can't you stop illegal immigrants or others from coming here? And the number one answer we give our constituents is when they come here, they can get jobs, get benefits against the law because of fraud. And here, the gentleman from Florida has put together the most effective anti-fraud measure we can find, without it changing the actions of the government one bit. And we find all this opposition. Ladies and gentlemen of this chamber, what I worry about is that this bill, which started out with good intentions, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, is going to end up being the same kind of thing that the public gets angry with us on. We say we're doing something, and we do nothing. Because every time someone makes a rational and small proposal to get something done, people say, well, what about this hypothetical, that hypothetical, etc. I urge support of this amendment. If you believe you want to stop fraud in immigration, you have no choice but to support this amendment.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Because, again, the reason illegal immigrants come to the United States is so they can defraud Social Security. That was Chuck Schumer. Now, and today, if you suggest that there's some problems with fraud and illegal immigrants and Social Security, Chuck Schumer will be the first one to go on Morning Joe accusing Elon Musk of trying to ruin Social Security. And it's almost like Democrats are lying hypocrites. I could be overstating the case, but hold that thought. I want your analysis, but we have business to do. We're not one of those, freewheeling podcasts that don't have any, obligations for advertisers and various things like traffic. Hey, it's 5:45, traffic and weather every 10 minutes, first on the fives. Jamie Whitten's.
Everywhere people go, they're asked for a Social Security card. In fact, one way to prove you're a bona fide person who can have a job is to ask for a driver's license and a Social Security card. This is an anti-fraud amendment. Over where we go, people say, well, why can't you stop illegal immigrants or others from coming here? And the number one answer we give our constituents is when they come here, they can get jobs, get benefits against the law because of fraud.
There you go, Patrice. That's, by the way, a great account on X. I subscribe to him. He's called Western Lensman. He found that video. And another great account called Maze found that video, also 96, Nancy Pelosi demanding tariffs against China because of their tariffs that they have on us. She even used the term reciprocal tariffs. So, Patrice, go ahead. Maybe it's me, but it seems to me that Democrats used to believe something that right now they scream and cry over when Trump proposes it.
Well, because they hate Trump more than they hate their own principled positions. This is what's going on here. Earlier this week, we saw Democrats in the Senate and 4 Republicans join together to kind of rebuke or rescind, cancel the tariff against Canada. They're also preparing now to do a similar effort to cancel a lot of these tariffs that have been imposed later this month after the Easter recess. And so the challenge is they're going to have to get the approval of the House. Good luck with that. The House is held by Republicans. And even if the Republicans joined with them on these resolutions or these bills to cancel the tariffs, then they'd have to figure out how to override a Trump veto, because President Trump is obviously going to veto something that's trying to get rid of his tariffs. I mean, the larger point, though, is Democrats have seen the realignment. They know that unions who are huge supporters of tariffs because it protects American businesses have aligned with President Trump. You saw the union workers at the White House when these tariffs were signed this week. And so they're doing their best to try to seem anti-Trump, even if it means betraying their own policy positions. They have been 100% supportive of tariffs and anti-anything free trade. But Trump derangement syndrome, Trump hatred is greater than all of that. And that's why you're seeing them, turn around and really become hypocrites on this issue. It's because of Trump. It's not because of they've morphed or evolved in their principles in any way.
That is correct. And listen, we're going to talk about the tariff issue specifically with Ryan Young coming up from CEI. He's at 7:05. I will just say that politicians do this all the time. Absolutely. Yeah. It's incumbent on the media to point it out and explain and challenge them on their hypocrisy. But sadly, I think that's only going to occur in media platforms like this one, not those big, very expensive corporate television ones.